They make a plastic one that, if it's hair or just gunk, with this is the thing, and when you pull up, it's got a bunch of grabby things.
That'd be a good thing to get a plastic one like that that has something like that. Yeah. You could shove it in there without being so afraid that you're gonna get hold of something. Okay, time to start. Last time, so we have 2 new things this week, because everybody's question has been, are we going to change the art every week? Because Heidi changed the art last time, and so she did again. We had this week's artwork is actually done by Heidi in a woodburning class. Okay, like that's not a very good description, is it? Woodburning class.
I think it's about as best I could do.
Okay, because that's not a very hard class if you think about it. Woodburning.
Woodburning. I can practice right out there.
You got a lot of material out there to storm last night.
Yeah. No, it'd be a free hobby, just burning wood. I just burn wood.
A potentially dangerous hobby. Okay. And so Wade would want us to say, Wade's a fireman, would want us to say, don't try this at home.
Yeah.
No, Heidi's initial effort in her woodburning art class was this one with a little bulldog looking up over something. And it says, don't limit your challenges, challenge your limits.
Challenge your limits.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then I have a different hat on this week because the last time we did an episode, I had that Abilene High School boys baseball cap, and I thought, well, I have a whole collection of baseball caps, actual baseball, not like caps, baseball caps that have other things on them.
Yeah, actually baseball teams.
Baseball teams, right. So, although about half of them are St. Louis Cardinals hats of various kinds.
How old is that one?
This is my oldest, my personal one. It's not the oldest one in my collection, but the one I've had the longest. I've had it since 1993, and in 1995, I was dating Nancy, and we went to to Worlds of Fun, and we were on the Viking Voyager, and it flew off my head when we went plunging down into the Santa Flush blue water and ended up in there, and I was ready to just let it go, but Nancy insisted on going and asking if she could, if they'd let her in, and they let her through the gate, and she went and fished it out of the.
She did
out of that blue water. So I should have known right there and then.
Yeah. Wow.
All right, that's the story that is. Now we got to talk about more serious stuff. Welcome to Where It Gets Deep with John and Jack. And our official motto is an unpolished and unapologetically sincere take on God and spirituality. But I think our unofficial motto is just two friends talking about God.
Yeah. Just talking.
Just talking. So we get a chance, we've had a couple of weeks off, but now we get to take a look again at what we were talking about in church on Sunday, which was about the story of Nehemiah and the pressures that he was under when they were rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem during the restoration period, when the Jews were allowed to return. We've lost that camera again. boy, it just really seems to be sensitive.
You're back.
Yeah, you got the camera back. I'm going to try to be very careful not to jiggle this cord.
Yeah.
So they were coming back from captivity in Babylon. Nehemiah was a servant to Artaxerxes, the emperor of Persia, who was the new, big emperor of what had previously been the Babylonian Empire and was now the Persian Empire. And he allowed Nehemiah, one day he's a cupbearer, he's a servant in the house of Artaxerxes, an honored and trusted servant, but a servant nonetheless. And a month later, he's the governor of Judah. He gets sent back and says, "You're in charge. You go rebuild the wall of your people's holy city."
Was he qualified?
Well, from all appearances, he was qualified to administrate and lead people. It's a good question, though. It's like, because in one sense, no, he didn't have any experience like in government.
Yeah.
But I suppose he'd seen plenty of it.
But he was a servant.
Yeah.
And so how do you pick a servant to go be in charge of something like that?
Well, interestingly, it's the reason it happened was because he had gotten word from, I suppose, friends or relatives that had gone back to Judah, that the walls even though they'd been rebuilding the temple and doing other things, that was part of their dream for going back, when the Jews began going back. And when you say going back, realize this is like the grandchildren. This is maybe children, definitely grandchildren of the people that went into captivity, because it was 70 years between the deportation and when the king of Persia began letting them go back, because it was Babylon that defeated them, took thousands and thousands of them away, resettled them in Babylon, and finally it's the Persian emperor who allows them to start returning. So these people who are going back, to them, Jerusalem's just a dream. It's a symbol. They've never seen their homeland. So anyway, some things are going on, but he learns that the wall of Jerusalem, its defenses, is crumbling, and nothing is being done about that. And he's very sad. And so the emperor, who apparently really likes and appreciates and trusts this guy, thinks he's a person of honor, so asks him, "Why are you so sad?" And he tells him. And so Artaxerxes thinks about it and says, "Well, then you go back to your homeland and take charge and see that it gets taken care of," and makes him the governor of Judah. Yeah. So, but when he gets there and he organizes the people, he's really a good administrator. He organizes them. He gets them together, with this purpose. They have this unified purpose. He keeps them working in shifts so that people can go back and work on their crops, and their stuff at home. And he posts guards all along the wall so that these local petty kings can't come and attack them, because the local kings of the surrounding kingdoms don't want this to happen. They see it as a threat to their power. The Jews regaining their place in that land, and so all of that is going forward very successfully. And so those kings then turn to stratagem and policy and deceit and threats and all this stuff to try to get it to stop. With Nehemiah, as the one who's the kind of the focus of all of the stuff they're trying to pull.
And this is right away. He takes the governorship and boom, right away, he's facing all these different adversities.
Yeah, I think so.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's a story that I think unfolds over weeks and months, probably. But yeah, it's
so the big thing is that he stayed true to his beliefs. Yeah.
And he didn't let people make him afraid, because he realized, that passage that was the center of that was the sermon text was, they did all these things to make us afraid, so that we wouldn't continue, doing what we were there to do. And then at the end of it, he says that they hired this guy. First they try to trick him into coming out into the desert for a meeting, which the whole idea of that was, we're going to grab you and probably kill him. And then they pretend, they say, everybody's saying that you're rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem to make yourself king. We're going to report you to the emperor, to Artaxerxes. And he says, and that'd be really scary, you're a long way from Persia.
Yeah.
And if the emperor gets these letters, he might start going, what, Nehemiah's a traitor? I'm going to take him down. And he says, he writes back to them and says, no such things as you say are happening.
And he knew that just based on his trust in Nehemiah. Or he knew.
Well, no. Nehemiah was the one that said no such things as you say are happening. He basically says, I'm calling your bluff. Write to Artaxerxes if you want, but but nothing like that is going. Yeah. Nothing like that's going on, and he's making the assumption that Artaxerxes is going to believe him first, But then finally they hire this guy, this priest, it's a Jewish priest. They bribe him and get him to try to get, he says, I've had a prophecy that you're going to be murdered in the night by your enemies. But I can go into the temple because I'm a priest. So you and I can go and hide in the temple at night, and you'll be safe there. But according to the law of Moses, only priests could go into the temple. And that was how Nehemiah, as a person of faith in that time, saw it. And he says, no, I won't go in. Who am I? What does he say? Who is there such as I who would go into the temple to save his life? Meaning, who's there who's like me and not a priest? Would go into the temple even to save his life. I will not go in. So he basically says, I'm not going to do something I believe would be wrong to protect myself, because then I could be discredited. People would see me running and hiding. They would run and hide, and I would lose all credibility, because the whole idea here is that I'm supposed to be this leader who's, acting from faith in God. And people would be upset with him. No, he doesn't really believe in God. But he didn't know that Shemaiah, the priest, had been bribed. At that point in time, he's looking back when he's writing this, and he says, and I realized that he had been hired that I might be afraid. And wow. So it's all about that whole idea of what are the things that make us afraid. To not just like normal fear, but the kind of voices. There were three things that I focused on. Those voices that make us afraid to stop being who we really are.
Right.
Those that would scare us into doing what is wrong, and those that would scare us into not trusting God.
Fears that would That's interesting. You could stop trusting God out of fear.
Yeah.
Like how?
Well, if you're afraid, if you've got a lot of fear and people are telling you negative things, or maybe your own mind is telling you negative things, but, you can start doubting God's really with you.
Yeah.
Doubting that God really loves you. Doubting that God has a good purpose, and that if you see things through, that God's going to, bring to pass what God has in mind.
Oh yeah. So Nehemiah had that.
It was kind of a longer explanation than we usually do here, but that was the background of this. But he did all those things. I mean, he didn't give in to all those different those different ways of trying to scare him. And because he said, such a man as I flee. He was trying. That was his first response, because he said that I'm a leader, and if people see me running, they'll run. But he also had this idea that he wasn't above the law. That he wasn't this special person. Just because he was a governor didn't mean he was this special person that had privileges that were denied to other people. And he hadn't forgotten, just a short time ago, I was a servant, in the house of Artaxerxes. Now I'm the governor. That's not going to go to my head.
Have you ever been challenged like that to been put in a situation to where you're being a Christian or your beliefs, you felt like almost unsafe? Or I asked you that because I wonder about that all the time. Not you. I wonder what Jack would do. What would Jack do?
He's like, what has Jack done? And it's like, what are all the times that Jack's compromised?
I could see me and Heidi standing somewhere in a situation like that, and I go, "What do you think, Jack?" And she's running down the street. It'd probably be the opposite, but so Heidi, what do you think? Heidi? Oh. Anyways.
That's hard to think about off the top of my head. It was like situations where I felt tempted to compromise out of fear. But I have wondered about it a lot, thought about it a lot. Because like some of those bigger things, like those stories that I was telling on Sunday, like about Nazi Germany, and how easy it was to convince an entire society of Christians to go along with terrible things, to target this, mainly the Jews, and make them the scapegoats for all their problems, and then, that led to worse and worse and worse things. But there were people who resisted, and they were. That was very hard. That would have been very hard. And I wonder, would I be first of all smart enough to know when I was being manipulated, and know that what Jesus teaches to enough that I would resist those voices in my own mind, first of all, and not go along with it. And would I have the guts to actually resist, to say no, I'm not going to support that.
Yeah, I think that's something we're all gonna have to face.
You think? At
some point. I believe that. Yeah. I believe that. I feel like in today's climate, if I profess to be a true Christian, I'm gonna get confronted. sooner or later. And maybe not in a positive way.
Yeah.
Maybe in a positive way. I don't know. But at some point, I'm going to have to open my mouth and express, my faith in Christ, or deny it.
Yeah.
I don't see a lot of options.
Or do what's right as opposed to what's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's part of what Nehemiah was being pushed to, and I think that's something that we don't maybe think about enough these days, about whether I have the moral tenacity.
Mm-hmm.
When it would be so much easier to just go along with a bad thing. I think one example of how this gets into daily life, and that is one place where I can see where I've been tempted, gossip.
Mm-hmm.
When you're in a work environment, usually work environment or school environment or a circle of friends or whatever, and people start running down other people, or they start talking, in prejudicial ways,
Mm-hmm.
about somebody or some group of people or whatever. Man, you gotta be on your toes, and you gotta be brave.
Mm-hmm.
Just even in that little, just environment of your peers, to resist that. Say, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not going along with that. I'm not talking like that. I'm not going to, speak ill of other people.
That'd be a good place to start.
Yeah.
The whole gossip thing. Get your feet wet and get my, on this being brave thing. But I think I've got morals.
Mm-hmm.
I'm compassionate. But the fear of physical pain, I don't like that.
Oh, me either. If they start threatening me with physical
Seriously.
I think we're probably a long way from that, but yeah, I know.
Do you think we're a long way away from that, Jack?
Yeah, I do. I'm not worried about, I know we hear, a lot of people think, Christians are going to be persecuted just for being Christians.
Uh-huh.
I just don't see that happening anytime soon, not in our culture, because there are too many Christians, by which I mean people who call themselves Christians,
Mm-hmm.
Who say that this is my religion.
Yeah.
But I do think that we might well be asked to compromise what I regard as Christian values, and by that I mean the things that Jesus taught us. And that priest that I talked about in the sermon, what was his name, Lichtenberg, who got in trouble for praying.
Yeah.
Remember that? It wasn't but it wasn't like, he wasn't getting in trouble for praying in public.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't that they were trying to shut down his Christianity or his freedom of expression. It was how he prayed, because he prayed for Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And his church allowed him to pray every day for Jews.
By himself?
In public worship.
In public worship.
And this is worship. This is not, he wasn't going out in the city square,
right.
Or the soccer field or whatever. But in his church, he was praying openly for the Jews. And so the Nazi government dragged him in and told him to cut it out. And they also they got his copy of Mein Kampf, which he had read, obviously. I suppose probably everybody in Germany had, and looked at his notes. And I think, man, if people start going through my journals looking for, incriminating political stuff, what would they find? But but they wanted to know what his attitude was toward Hitler. But he said about the evacuation of the Jews from German territory, he said, I'm opposed to it with all its attendant features because it is directed against the chief commandment of Christianity, which is love thy neighbor as thyself. You know, and
how do you argue with that?
and he, but the thing is that the Nazis did argue with it. They said they said stop preaching, and he refused, and they sent him to Dhaka, and he never arrived. I mean, he died on the way. Yeah, I don't know how brave I would be in that situation, but I certainly hope I would have the guts to pray for people who are being persecuted.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. I want to think that everybody like to think that I would stand for Christ, that I would, no, you're getting it wrong. Listen, this is, let me show you, let me talk to you about Jesus, and I don't know. It's a question I'd like to have a firm answer on.
Yeah.
But I compare, I think, I don't know if it's be an accurate comparison, but like John the Baptist.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued by him, being out there.
Oh, man.
And not caring.
Speaking truth to power.
Yeah.
No matter what. Yeah, you're right. And getting himself arrested and ultimately killed.
But he was passionate. I mean, that's what the truth does for a person.
Man.
If you know in your heart what the truth is, and that Jesus is it, and that he's our Savior. If you got that firmly packed in there, heck yeah, I think I'd be brave.
Yeah.
So it makes me ask the question about myself. Where the heck am I at with this faith thing? I'm
looking at the chat. That reminds me of a thing my brother said once when we were, Christian says, fear-mongering. Oh, that was somebody else that asked what the art was for tonight, but we already explained that. Fear-mongering is becoming the overreaching feeling in social media, and the crowd followers give us many opportunities to stand for what we believe. It's actually right about that.
Say that again.
That fear-mongering is becoming the overreaching feeling in social media, and the crowd followers give us many opportunities to stand for what we believe. So when you if you're on Facebook or whatever, and people, somebody's saying something that's fear-mongering, that's about how evil these people are, and then everybody's going like, yeah, blah blah blah. And are you going to be the person that wades into that?
Okay.
And says no, I disagree with that, or whatever. It's something else here, but I don't think it all got written down. It strikes me how amazing it is that something.
So besides denying Jesus 3 times, Peter.
Okay.
Overall, was he pretty brave with his testimony, with his?
Oh man, from there on.
Yeah.
He was like Mr. Guts.
Yeah.
He was, drag me before the Sanhedrin, fine. Beat me, fine. He only needed to feel really, really bad about denying Jesus once,
right? For it
to like drive out all his apparent. This is like we have limited knowledge. We don't know what Peter was like day to day. You're living several decades after Jesus' resurrection, and you're like, When are you coming back, Jesus? Feeling pretty bummed here. Been a long time since I had any visions. Been a long time since there were any major spiritual events. People aren't coming to my preaching sessions the way they did back in the second chapter of Acts.
Yeah.
On the day of Pentecost. But that's funny.
So from then on, something happened to him. I mean,
yeah.
And he wasn't afraid anymore, was he?
I don't know if he wasn't afraid, but he didn't give in.
He didn't give in
to fear. And there's something, when in the Gospel of John, when Jesus meets, when he's eating breakfast at the Sea of Galilee with the disciples, and he says, Peter, and he basically cancels out Peter's 3 denials by saying, do you love me 3 times? And it really bums Peter out, because it's like, why does Jesus have to ask me over and over again if I love him? Does he doubt that I love him? And Peter over and over says, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he tells him all 3 times, he says, feed my sheep. He's basically telling him, okay, if you love me, this is your job. It's to feed my sheep. And that's what it's going to be from now on. And then he tells him, when you were young, you girded yourself and you went where you wanted. But when you are old, someone else will take hold of you and lead you where you do not want to go. And John includes the little linear note, and by this he meant to say by what death Peter would glorify him. He's basically saying people are going to take you and kill you when you are older because of your consistent faith in me and being the leader of my flock, which is scary. But that's kind of answers your question there. Think about Peter. Well, I think we need to, but I think kind of in wrapping up the main part of the podcast, I'd kind of like to mention that last part of the sermon where it was talking about not giving in to the voices that make you afraid that make you doubt God. Because when we get afraid or depressed or bored or we're not seeing the outcome of our efforts right now, we begin to doubt God's purpose. But if we see it through, God is going to be there. And it's like, and then Norman Vincent Peale had that song, that old hymn that he quoted to himself a lot. That so far thy power hath brought me, sure it still will lead me on. And God's brought me this far. Maybe right now is a dark time. Maybe right now is not a successful time. Maybe even right now is a persecution time. But if I stick with it and I keep on trying my best and to be a good person, to follow Jesus, to be faithful, he's gonna see me through it. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and call that the conclusion of the podcast proper. Now and so thank you everybody for joining us tonight. We appreciate it, and for listening to the podcast.